human is.
There's a problem in the Muslim community.
And then they have to stop me and every Muslim in the entire airport.
Is it fair or is it unfair?
In general, the system is just not fair.
You got me there.
My name is Michael Sandel. I teach political philosophy at Harvard University. For me, philosophy is not just an academic subject. It doesn't just reside in the heavens beyond the world. It belongs in the city where citizens gather. Is discrimination always unjust? How should we deal with inequalities of income and wealth? Should national borders matter?
We are going to build a great border wall.
These are dangerous times for democracy. We're here in Greece at the sanctuary of Amphiarios. Not far from here, democracy was born, and so was Western philosophy. We've gathered a group of young people from around the world, and in the spirit of Socrates, we're going to engage in some lively debates about the big questions facing our societies.
You and I, we don't have the same chances when we are born.
Can we take care of everybody?
Yeah, you can. You should.
We need to find a way to reason together about hard moral questions. And above all, we need to ask ourselves, what is the right thing to do? Do rich countries have a moral duty to accept refugees fleeing war and persecution? What about immigrants who simply are in search of a better life, better economic opportunities? Should national borders matter? Few subjects are as fiercely debated these days than immigration. All the more reason to delve into the big philosophical principles underlying those debates. Here's our first question. How many think that affluent countries have a moral obligation to admit refugees fleeing war and persecution? How many say yes? Everyone. Let's say an immigrant who is fleeing poverty and economic hardship. Do affluent countries have a moral obligation to admit such immigrants? How many say yes? How many say no? Not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
All right, so here we have more of a division of opinion. Those of you who see a moral difference between the two, Nora, what's the difference?
I feel like when they're leaving because their place became literally uninhabitable,
Yes.
then in a war circumstance, they will need to move. But in a way, when you could stay, but it's the economy that got ruined,
Yeah.
I feel like if people could stay where they are, but we could give them help where they are, I don't feel like the actual movement is necessary.
Ignatius.
If their livelihood is being compromised because of their economic capacity to sustain themselves that way, then I think they can come over for economic reasons.
Suppose they're just poor and they want a better chance in life.
They have to stand in line.
They have to stand in line. Danny.
Well, I'm a refugee. We fled Lebanon thanks to the war. But back then you didn't have as much refugees as we do today, you know. But what's happening in the Netherlands at the moment is that everybody is talking about refugee, or many people actually say that some of them are coming from Africa because they want to escape poverty, but other ones are trying to escape war. So there needs to be a line, you know, to draw a line.
All right, let's see who else would draw a distinction between admitting a refugee and admitting an immigrant seeking a better life.
I think my stand for voting in favor of the moral obligation for refugees come from where does that moral obligation come from? And I think a lot of the countries that you mentioned have played a role in this instability of those regions. And I think that's where the moral obligation comes from.
Just let me stick with that one. Suppose there's a rich country that was not implicated in fomenting or contributing to the civil war or to the persecution.
I think that country does not exist.
You think all affluent countries are implicated in the conditions that create refugees?
Yes.
Why do you think that?
Because I feel that the socioeconomic power that has been built in Western Europe and the US in particular have destabilized huge parts of the Middle East, for instance. And if you look at the case of Syria, what country has not directly or indirectly played a role in the destabilization of this region?
But you would not say the same about the moral implication of rich countries in poverty?
The priority for me is really to make sure that people whose life is in danger, and I put it in the same category like homosexuals in countries where they're threatened, that those people can live. I think that's for me a must. And then the second part is, what is your strategy? Is it better to welcome people who are seeking a better life, or is it better to drive the economic development in their country?
Help them there.
For me, that makes my hair stand up, because that's very often how the Western world sees, I think I have a problem with the word help.
Yeah, so I think a good case to this is all the foreign aid that's dumped into
it destroys
Africa
an economy.
for like decades now, and it hasn't not worked. So I worked in Kenya for some time, and it really does not work to dump money on those countries in terms of grants or what helps is to consider them as a viable, legitimate economic partner. And I think this is the step that is missing today in a lot of policies that are driven in the US.
Natalie?
I think we're all looking for luck. And if there's a bigger chance for me to find luck in Spain, in my profession, I think I should have the right to go there, or to America.
Someone who wants a better life, even not someone who's on the verge of death or starvation, should be able to move to Spain, or for example, or to the US.
I'm privileged because I was born in a Western country.
Yeah.
So for me to move to somewhere else, it would be like, oh yeah, great, have fun, enjoy. But
Right.
if somebody is like born in, like, let's say, Bangladesh, and they want to work in Holland, it's a big problem. That's, I think, discrimination.
You're saying it's a matter of luck where we're born. Some of us are born in rich countries. Other people are born in poor countries. If that's a matter of luck, not our due, then who are we as people in affluent countries to say, well, you can come under certain circumstances, but not under others?
If you have 98 billion people all come to your country at once, then you flummox it.
What does that mean, flummox it?
Ruin it.
Ruin it?
Well, if a country has too many people come at once,
yes,
then
too many people, then
the system will fail.
It's like if you have a party and the party has a certain culture in it, and these people work hard to maintain that culture in the party. You don't want to invite, like maybe if it's an electro party, a bunch of skinheads to come in and ruin and disrupt the culture in the party, and maybe vice versa. You don't want to go to their party and disrupt their party, because then you won't be able to maintain the borders, the culture, and the values
That's
of
different
that,
to my point,
of
I
that
just wanna
party.
all right. Well, we do have.
We was talking about the amount of people, not about the culture.
All right, but these are two different.
The amount of people might be part of the culture. Like if you don't want a place that's so overcrowded and that prizes more space per capita, so it could be involved.
All right, but we do have two different arguments here. One is about preserving the culture. The other is the argument about.
It's about services and employment. A country's system can't maintain more people.
Services and employment.
Yeah.
Economics.
Yeah.
Culture and economics.
Yeah.
So we have two different arguments for the moral significance of national borders so far. Vincent.
I think whether it's skinheads or numbers, regardless, I think a society has some kind of right to create the society that it wants, and that implicitly means to potentially exclude aliens and to determine what kind of members that society should consist of. There is some kind of right of that creation of your own society.
And where does that right come from? Why do we have such a right, do you think?
Because everything we do, everything we breathe, everything where we live in is that society. And to have our own, that ownership over the education that we want to have, about the choices that we make as a group. I think that is important to have that own sovereignty, basically.
I think that the people who are already living there, whether it's moral or not, because that can be a completely open-ended debate, they are the ones that are there right now, and practically they have influence over who will be crossing borders or living within their community, and those need to be taken into account. So while that does exist, I think I can only really hope that the people who are making those decisions have a longer-term view on the economic benefits of immigrants or refugees and the potential just benefits as a whole that you can get from intermingling with other cultures. You don't lose yourself, you simply gain more options.
I think we have to be open to any immigrant. Refugees, we have a clear moral stake there. Economic immigrants, of course. But even just immigrants like me, I'm not escaping from, a poor country. I'm just moving to the US. I found love there. And I think we should be open to any form of immigration because it's a form of richness.
They don't see much difference between refugees and immigration. They always look at refugees as someone that you have to help. And then with immigration, someone who you have to give something to, not give, but something where you have to give up something because of them. And I just never felt like an immigrant is here and it's going to take something off me, something of mine, or like something that I own. I always felt like an immigrant is here because they want to work, they want to have a life. It's not my life they want, it's their own life that they want to have.
I would like to ask Natalie a question, because if you make it smaller and you say you have a street with families and you live in a house with your family, and your neighbor boy says to you, yeah, my house, it sucks, we don't have a television and anything, can I live at your place?
I'll say, of course, sure.
Yeah?
No. Listen, if I have the right to say, oh, I want to go to Australia, okay, I have to fill out a form to get a visa, right? And then we have to see if it's possible. I think we in the Western country, we in Europe, in Holland, we have to check, like, okay, who wants to come in? Let's give people an option to come in. Let's give them like the same options that I have to go to Australia or to anywhere else.
Philip? I think the moral sweet spot is you can't defend the contingency of a state or a nation. Why people want to defend it is because there is a limited amount of wealth, and if you share it with everybody, they fear that their wealth will diminish. And even if it's a relative decline, people are just programmed to defend that. So I think actually bringing the world down to a street or even a room is a very appropriate image, because you see how disproportionate everything is. And you're also confronted with the fact that you're defending your own privileges over others, and then start saying, we've built up this society. You were born there, it's luck. And if other people were born there, they would have had the same life as you, and they probably would have said the same thing, which is, we can't have everybody here.
Are you suggesting, Philip, that the moral significance of national borders is really nothing on reflection?
Yes.
There is no moral significance.
Exactly, but the practical...
It's a matter of accident. It's a matter of contingency.
Yes.
It's a matter of luck. Some people were born on a rich street, to a rich family, or to a rich country, and others weren't. And therefore, are you saying that those who live in the rich countries have no right to say, you stay out, because if all of you come in, you will reduce our affluence?
Well, they have no moral right, to my mind.
They don't.
They have a practical right. Well,
what does that mean exactly?
When people have things, they are programmed, to my mind, to fear losing them. So I get Alfie's point that if you have a hospital that is able to serve 100 people and 500 people come in, that the hospital diminishes in healthcare services. So I get that people are programmed to say, I'm sorry, but no.
But should we deprogram people? Should we rethink or re-educate people in ourselves from thinking this way?
Perfectly. There would be a hospital in everybody's environment where they could go to.
Well, there's another solution if you want to use the hospital analogy. If the hospital can only care for 100 people, instead of arbitrarily saying the 100 who get there first have the right to be there, you could have a lottery.
Well, we're coming...
Morally speaking. Yeah. Vincent, what do you say? You don't see it that way.
No, I agree with the part that we're born in different parts of the world, and that seems unfair. That's true. But can I ask you a question? Do you think you have a right to get the inheritance of your father?
No. So luckily, there isn't any, so it's easy for me to say. But no.
Why not?
Because...
Will you give it away?
I mean, easy again to say because I don't have a lot of wealth, but I always imagine that if I had a lot of wealth, I would give most of it away. Again, this is easy to say because I don't have it. But why would I have more right to something that somebody else, in this case my father, made during his life than anybody else? The point I was trying to stress is that I think Emma's right in saying that people who live in a certain place, pay their taxes and contribute to society, feel that they are justified in reaping the benefits of that society. But actually people who grow up in different places weren't in the position to contribute anything to society that could give them the same amount of benefits. So I think anything that comes my way on top of the benefits that this society already gives me, I should share.
So you basically say there's no associative link. There is no difference in the associative link that I have with your father than you have with your father.
There is a big difference.
When it comes to that distribution.
Redistribution of wealth, I don't think there's much of a difference.
Why is it any different than any other link that you have with your father?
Because I grew up with him, we had conversations on culture and the family, and he's a significant part of my cultural life, but my financial life, because for the first 18 years of my life. But that was already, that's quite a substantial part of my life.
Well, to me, it seems kind of a law of nature, or like a natural thing.
A law of nature?
Yes, like a natural thing that things are being passed on to your children.
Tristan?
Especially with the hospital examples, when you actually look at a lot of these studies, the immigrants that are coming into the US or any other country actually end up being an economic boost. They're working, they're paying their taxes, they are contributing to the health care that they eventually go in for. They have statistically lower crime rates. We keep on looking at these as national borders or a street with many houses, but the world today is increasingly shrinking with economies, technology, even the way that we treat different cultures, and seeing this more as like a much larger house with many rooms, and we're all vaguely responsible for each other in some way is probably a better way of actually looking at all this. Then they're different, they're just down the hall.
So do you think it's a mistake to attribute any moral significance to national borders?
I think so, yeah.
We should get out of that habit. We should question that convention.
Yeah, they can be used, say, politically or economically, or be regions of certain cultures, but they shouldn't be an exclusion zone to everybody else.
Anna?
If we could build a community in which everybody would agree that we should be open to everybody, and everybody can contribute in a way that we agree on, then I think that would be a very good idea. I just think that with the politics of this moment and the amount of fear that's rising, I think it would be very hard to do that.
Rita?
I think part of the fear that's rising is also the fact that we base our, and I share your opinion of a best case scenario, we base that on the assumption that we share a common humanity in the sense of everybody's good, you know? So I think much of the fear comes from the experience that that's not true, that the people who come don't share your morality,
that they're afraid
and don't care as much. For example, for the environment, you know, just give a very easy example. You know,
you think countries should only accept people who agree with the dominant opinion or values?
I think that the utopian picture is so beautiful because I'm imagining that all the people who come in really also care for nature as much as I do. So I don't mind sharing my garden with them. But what if they don't, you know?
But
and
what
they
if
really screw up my
Rita,
garden?
what if some existing members of your community don't agree with you, whether it's on the environment or tax policy or any other question? Should they be excluded, expelled?
I find I'm using the environment to give an example of what I, for myself, consider really fundamental values, also for humanity as a species.
But that can't be an argument, if I understand you right. That can't be an argument against letting in people who disagree unless you're prepared to say it's an argument for kicking out people who disagree.
Sure. You got me there.
When it comes to immigration, we do tend to think a lot of the negatives, and it's very easy to get kind of trapped into this fear or unknown, and even within liberal groups or leftist groups, there's this idea that we should celebrate identity and identity politics, and think we should talk always about differences and how to make the differences work. But I personally am more of a utopian. I like to think of the ideal solution, the ideal that I would want to live, and keep my imagination in that space as opposed to thinking about the negatives.
Iedereen wil natuurlijk ook graag het goede doen en bijvoorbeeld vluchtelingen opvangen die uit een oorlogszone komen. Dat wil iedereen, elk weldenkend mens wil dat. Maar op een gegeven moment, als je dan een stapje verder gaat, wil je dan ook de mensen opvangen die het misschien ergens minder slecht hebben. Dat je er toch op wat meer morele, maar ook praktische bezwaren stuit.
Ik denk dat het essentieel is dat je, zeker op dit onderwerp, de tijd neemt om te luisteren naar elkaar en erachter komt wat de beweegreden is of wat de reden is waarom iemand zo vasthoudt aan een land of een cultuur of het dichtgooien van grenzen. Want de beweegredenen zijn veel emotioneler en veel persoonlijker dan dit is nou eenmaal het land en ik wil dat dat niet verandert. Het raakt bij mensen heel erg aan hun identiteit.
I want to test this question of borders by asking a question not about letting people in, but about letting people out. Who thinks that if national borders matter, countries should be able not only to restrict who comes in, but should also restrict the conditions on which people leave? How many think there might be a case for that? 3 people only?
If someone committed a crime in your country and you're looking for him, you're going to block your borders to make sure he doesn't escape. So, in essence, we have a system that prevents people from leaving the country if we want them not to.
What about if it doesn't involve the commission of a crime, but simply we need these people? For example, in the developing world, brain drain. Nora, you were going to raise that?
Yes, because we had a huge problem about this. So as soon as Hungary became part of the EU...
This is in Hungary?
Yes,
yeah,
and
explain.
it's very specific, and they actually had to put measures in there because there was such a huge proportion of the young population leaving, but they just made a simple rule that it's okay if you want to leave, but if you got your degree in Hungary and we have free education, then you either pay it back or you can't leave until you worked so many years, because that would be basically just extracting from a country and then leaving it.
Do you think it was just or unjust?
I feel like it was just. From a society point of view, it was.
All right, let's take the vote again. How many think there is some justification for that? All right, look how many minds you've changed, Nora. All right. Is there anyone else who would like to speak for the restriction on exit?
I'm very confused because I think I want to say yes, indeed, you have to pay back what you got if they made it clear before you signed in. But freedom, it's about freedom. You're not free. I think freedom is one of the most important aspects. And not being able to use this freedom or having this freedom, I think that's the biggest problem that I can't say, yes, let's restrict them.
All right, if this is about freedom, the freedom to leave, do you think the same principle of freedom
to leave the other country and come into?
Argues the freedom to enter?
Yes.
That's an argument for open borders.
Yes.
Let's just focus on the argument from preserving a certain standard of living. Who disagrees with that reason and can offer a rejoinder to it, Caroline?
Well, I think that that standard of living is set in a time. So you've had that for a while. When the situation changes, which is what I like about the world, that things change and evolve, it could mean that there is a difference in your quality of life because you have to deal with the rest of the world. They're there.
And connected with Caroline's rejoinder is an argument we heard earlier that why should people who happen to have been born in a rich country, why do they have a right to stay there and prevent other poor people from coming, if it's just a matter of luck, accident of birth. So, of the defenders of national borders, how do you address that argument? We'll come in a minute to the cultural argument, shared values. Vincent.
Yes, I think it doesn't really has something to do with poverty or wealth. I think it's about preserving that societal aspect, that sense of belonging.
All right, but that's the second argument, the sense of identity, shared identity. So you reject the idea that a country has a right to restrict immigration to preserve its standard of living. You reject that, or you don't?
I think, no, I don't.
You don't?
No.
Because you put the example earlier to Philip about inheritance.
Exactly.
All right, so what do you say to the arguments that you've heard that it's just lucky if you're born to rich parents or in a rich country? Why do you have a right to preserve that?
Why do you have a right as someone that is born in a different country, a not wealthy country? What's your claim on that wealth? And I think if we look at everything, is that, and of course we want to cure the owl in the world, but if we just look at that simple example, I think the children of the people who built it have a more associative right to that wealth.
An associative right.
I think the question is, what do you claim to be yours? So what do you think is your ownership? But if that means that what you're born with is automatically yours, then you will create a situation where you think you can control that country or that wealth or whatever you've gotten. And I think on a moral perspective, I mean, I hated when people borrowed my clothes. I wanted them to be mine, but on a moral standpoint, on a moral point of view, I don't want to be that kind of person. I don't want to be the kind of person that claims that things are mine if they just got to me by luck. I don't own my country. My grandparents lived there. That doesn't mean that it's mine or that I have any right to claim it. You cannot give a country to somebody.
But what you're standing on, the affluence standing on, the culture that you're standing on, everything that you live, breathe, and do in your society, you're an heir of your grandparents, your great-grandparents, and
I'm an heir of the world. I'm an heir of everybody.
Well, you can't just generalize so much when we're talking about specific things.
Yeah, you can. You should, because you're from every part of the world, as are we.
Ignacio, can I ask you a question?
What?
Like, do you think that the fact that we are rich because we formerly colonized maybe countries or so, that we have a right to claim that affluence and to say, no, by luck it's mine, and I'm not, I very much agree with you.
I don't think it's by luck, because I think that people took the voyage overseas, they risked their lives, they went there and they planted their culture, and then they formed the colonies, and then they were able to have a culture that was more about like pulling up your bootstraps and not really trying to depend on someone else or the common good for help, but you were free to succeed but also fail, you know, and only through maintaining that and making those sacrifices were we able to create so much wealth and abundance.
Caroline actually changed my mind, because I don't feel that the wealth that I inherited I have the right to keep, especially because like a lot of Western countries actually stole a lot of stuff from poorer countries, and we now pretend that we have the right to keep that. I do feel though that what I inherited I have the right to share with whomever I feel shares my values. That's the only thing that I would like to add to that discussion. But I don't feel that I have the right to keep what I inherited, because I didn't conquer it myself.
Then there's a sense of ownership. If you can choose whatever happens with it, that's the implicit definition of ownership.
Yeah.
Iets wat je vader heeft gedaan, of als je een cadeau krijgt van je vader of van je moeder, of van je opa of misschien je overgrootopa, dat je daar eerder een soort van aanspraak op maakt dan dat iemand anders dat doet. Het is niet zo dat iemand anders er helemaal geen aanspraak op kan maken, en dat is de reden waarom we met elkaar dingen delen. Maar waar het in beginsel om gaat, is dat wie heeft daar in beginsel de meeste aanspraak op?
I was sort of surprised about Ignacio's views on our right to have, say, the land or resources, economic capital that we have today, based on the fact that we were imperialistic in the past and actually took it. The idea that we actually deserve it or have any claim to it today, because of that, was a little startling.
Ik denk als je bang bent om dingen te verliezen en je gaat dus je identiteit, je cultuur, en je gaat het allemaal afbakenen, dan verlies je eigenlijk alles, gegarandeerd. Ik denk dat de enige manier om te zorgen dat je overeind blijft, betekent dat het fluctueert, dat soms situaties veranderen. Kingdoms rise and they fall. Ja, dat hoort erbij. Als je dat tegengaat, dan gaat het sowieso fout. I think the biggest question is how can you make sure people feel like they belong somewhere without them having to feel like they own it.
What about patriotism? Doesn't patriotism try to offer an answer to that question? Sense of belonging without necessarily owning.
Patriotism, does that exclude owning it?
Well,
per definition?
I don't know. Is patriotism a good thing or a bad thing?
It's a great thing. Sounds like a trick question.
I think it's a bad thing because to me it feels like there's one group and one an excluded group or included group.
Insiders and outsiders.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what you don't like about it.
No, I think that you can also belong to something without
being in that group.
Yeah.
All right. Patriotism, is it good or bad, Derek?
I think it's bad.
Bad thing. So
I
you
think
agree
I
with
actually
Caleb.
think we have a moral obligation to let people into our country, as opposed to just saying yes or no, like we'll take it as it goes. Like I think we have a moral obligation to let
any
people
restrictions at all?
No, we should want people to come in. And the reason I say
the
this,
best people though, right?
No. There's
any people?
I think what we inherently value as humans is empathy. We love empathy. We think that like really that's how social structures are built, right? With empathy. And by creating borders or by creating ownership, by creating like laws around immigration, we are basically codifying this. This is where empathy must end.
Alfie?
Patriotism isn't necessarily incompatible with open borders. It's fine, and the part of the whole kind of thing that makes London brilliant is multiculturalism is a part of the identity, and it's what we aspire to. It's also what made America kind of great. It was a model immigrant nation for a long time. And if you make that part of the unifying identity, then you have a unicultural aspect to multiculturalism.
I think that's a great example because people have asked me very often, where do I feel home? And I cannot get myself around the idea that I'm a patriot for Europe, but there's no way I can break that down to a single country of my choice, even if I'm a citizen of one of those countries.
All right, I want to get back to this question of universal human concern. Is that the condition that we should aim at? Sergio, what do you think?
Do we agree on the fact that immigrants make us richer, not just from an economic standpoint, but from a cultural standpoint? How does that happen exactly if these immigrants come as humans and not as belonging to their own original cultures?
I think you can feel a sense of belonging to a place and a culture and still have free movement. And not everybody will move because people feel belonging to a place. And the people that belong bring a piece of that place to another place. Food, and enrich it in that way. We don't have to go for a binary approach where it's like a switch.
And I agree with you. And in fact, I believe that states do not have a moral right to close their borders. But I do believe that we cannot ask ourselves or others to leave their identity behind when they move, to leave their culture behind, because that identity is what actually makes our communities better.
I agree. I'm struggling a lot with your question because yes, you cannot leave it behind completely who you are, but if you come into a new country, you want to assimilate is the word that we use in France for that. And that creates a lot of tension. So how do you balance assimilation versus integration?
No, build a new community.
Exactly.
Bring your culture to my culture and we make something new out of it. Where you can be you and I can be me. There's change and the world is changing.
Can I come to your community and not speak your language?
Yeah, because you will learn it.
Communication still?
If we can communicate on another level.
I was surprised in the US when you go to a public office, they ask you, do you want somebody who speaks Chinese or Spanish?
Yeah.
In France, that would never happen. You are supposed to speak French.
Yeah.
And how far do we take that integration then? Can I go to a country and to Holland and say, I don't want to speak Dutch ever? It happens. A lot of people do that.
As long as you find a form to communicate with the rest of the people. I don't care. We find a way to communicate with each other, and as long as we have respect and the same values, we can build a new community.
But Isham's question underlies there could be conflicting values. Let's say I believe women should be able to go to school and have an education, but the culture I bring to Europe, you believe that, sorry, but the culture I bring, my daughter, no, she doesn't go to school. She'll stay at home. Like, what do you, there's tension there.
There's always going to be tension, but are you open for communication to find a new way?
I struggle with my identity as well, because I was 15 when I went away from Lebanon. I do love the Lebanese way of living, but I adjusted to the Dutch one as well. If you ask me, like, are you Dutch or Lebanese? I didn't let my Lebanese identity go. I did let some of those things, go, because I don't like them now anymore. And I don't like some of the Dutch things, so I combine it. And when I'm in Lebanon, actually, they say, oh, you're too European. And sometimes in Holland, they think I'm too Lebanese. You learn to adjust, as long as you're open for it, but that doesn't mean that you have to ignore everything and leave everything behind.
And it's about obligation to be...
Sorry?
I think it has to do with respect. I think as immigrants, you have to respect the laws. If I decide to move to Saudi, I will have to respect the laws that I have to cover. If you move to Holland, you have to respect the laws that children have to go to school. So I think it all has to do with respecting and understanding that, oh, I'm moving to a different country. Okay, I have to respect the laws of this country.
Now, Sergio, does this discussion of multiculturalism bear out your point that if we follow Caroline's idea and aspire to universal human concern, overcoming the particular identities that underwrite patriotism and nationalism and things like that, that there would be no communities of character to give meaning to the diversity that most people in the group favor.
We would be impoverished, we wouldn't be richer. Because you see, I think Hashem has a great point. It is complex to meet those two demands, but if we strive for that, in the way in which we were describing as a constantly evolving community and constantly evolving belongings. I'm from Napoli, which if you're from Italy, you know that means a very specific belonging. But I can easily understand what I owe to my city and live my own personal identity as a Neapolitan, as an Italian, a European, and now as someone who's living in the United States. This thing is not necessarily conflicting. What is problematic is what for example, you raise the example of France, I think is this idea of establishing a sort of neutral community in which, okay, we're all human beings. We're all part of the human race. And in that sense, I don't really see how we can enrich each other with each other's experiences, cultures, faiths even, with all those things that compose who we are.
Well, I don't understand how you think that you cannot take your identity with you.
But if you mix and match, don't you strive for belonging?
No.
Rather than...
No, I think you strive for... I think the example of the big cities is great. You can all live together and take the part that you want to execute or to be, and to not have ownership of that place.
Wouldn't you want to belong to this new community that we are building together with the richer experiences that are coming from abroad? I would want to belong to that.
Yeah.
But not by excluding others.
No, absolutely. Absolutely.
No, but that's the point.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
I agree.
But that, my understanding of that is that we're starting something new, and that belonging is in its own way a form of patriotism.
I thought patriotism it belonged to where you are from. So the thing that you identify most with. But I think that can change. So is there changing patriotism? Does that exist?
But the issue here seems to be the moral status, not of patriotism only, but of particularity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you're wary of particularity as a political identity.
Mm-hmm.
And Sergio is insisting, he's trying to persuade you to embrace it.
think we actually can get everybody living together and have both the, say, unique cultural aspects and, say, a larger city that you're all working in together. I got to live in Singapore for a summer 2 years ago, and I lived in the Arab district. I could take 2 train stops up to Little India. There's a Chinatown, a Malay district. And everybody I was working with had a very distinct personality. They're very proud of it, very patriotic towards their home countries and identity, as well as being part of Singapore. We did wonderful work together, and then you could go down the street into a new culture. There were blurry lines between the various communities, and you had this city-state, call it, with many individual cultures that were all working together on the inside. No one diluted. They all built up and helped everyone.
Well, immigration is one of the most fiercely contested issues in our politics today. And we've had a lively debate about it, but without, I think, the ferocity that sometimes afflicts public debate on this question. The arguments in favor of national borders, morally speaking, seem to begin with the idea, well, we can't let everybody in. The numbers would be overwhelming. It would reduce the standard of living. It would crash welfare states and social welfare programs. It would be impractical. These are largely economic questions about the standard of living. But as we probed those arguments, we found that they were closely connected to, maybe even dependent on, another deeper set of principles and also disagreements about membership, shared culture, shared values, what it is to belong to a particular community in a particular place. So what seem in our public debates to be largely economic arguments about immigration are actually about bigger, deeper questions. What do we owe one another as fellow citizens? Do we owe more to our fellow citizens than we owe to people half a world away? Is patriotism a virtue, or is it a vice ideally to be overcome? To identify these bigger stakes in the debate about immigration isn't to put to rest the controversies we have, but it is to give it a certain shape and to identify some of the bigger principles that our ongoing debates about immigration and the nation state need to attend to.
Half Chinese and half American. My dad is American of German and Irish descent. My mother's Taiwanese. And when I was growing up, I was born in the UK and lived in Southeast Asia, Singapore, Hong Kong, and Bangkok. And then I moved to the US. So to me, immigration is part of who I am. I am multicultural. I have no home, and also I call many places home. So I thought my personal experience is really relevant to this because of that multicultural factor of my life and who I am.
Kijk, als ik iets toe kan voegen, dan zal het land me waarschijnlijk aannemen. En als ik ergens niets iets kan toevoegen, bijvoorbeeld, ik zou niet direct weten wat ik in Amerika zou moeten doen, dan zal het land mij waarschijnlijk niet aannemen, maar iemand anders misschien wel. En dat is inherent natuurlijk al een beetje oneerlijk, maar dat is, uiteindelijk vind ik dat de keuze van die samenleving zelf.
I don't think you speak with the same Rita than before the debate on immigration, because I was always hesitant to take his stance, and I realized I was able to take a stance because I believe that morally we can say this should be the way it should be, and that still gives us space to say, like, it might never happen. But I'm happy that I got the confidence to say, for these moral values, I would stand up for.
Ultimately, I mean, if you even just go as far as the moon and look back, like, the Earth is a tiny, fragile, insignificant thing. And the idea that we're going to wreck so many lives or the environment or care so much about the economies, we don't take care of each other, like, we've only got the one chance. We should actually try to make this work.
If you would like to continue this discussion, please join us online at therightthingtodo.nl and tell us what you think. Thank you all very much.